Welcome to Lyric Lab Poetry. My name is Martin Jago, and in this video we are exploring the poems that we don't write. And in order to do that, the first thing I'm going to ask you to do is to imagine all the poems that you have written, whether they are published or unpublished, but imagine them all gathered together in one place. And this collection of poetry represents you and your creative endeavors over the last, I don't know how long, but it's the body of work that represents you as a poet. Now, in a parallel world, I want you to think about another collection of poetry. And this poetry is also poetry by you, but it is poetry that has remained unwritten. And it remains unwritten not because we haven't imagined it into being yet. It remains unwritten because we have chosen not to write it. And we're going to do a quick exercise. So go ahead and grab a notebook and a pen or a piece of paper. And the exercise is just to help you identify the specific poem that remains unwritten. So under the first heading, and the heading is Taboo Poems, you're going to just write down a poem that remains unwritten for a specific reason. It might be, for example, that the poem represents a personal taboo in terms of the subject matter. Maybe it's a poem that you associate with feelings of guilt or shame or embarrassment to write about that subject matter or experience. But just write down a very specific note to yourself, that poem. What is that poem? And the next heading is maybe related. It's poems that we feel are too painful to write. So go ahead under that painful poem heading, write down the specific poem that comes to mind that you choose not to write about. It may be that we feel the subject matter, we might feel too close to the subject matter. It may be that this is a poem that may be written one day, but right now we feel the proximity on a personal level to the subject matter too much to bear or handle. The third type of poem on that list is maybe a cliched poem, a poem we avoid because we don't know how to write about that poem or bring that poem into being without dealing in cliches. It feels to me that if we're considering that we're not doing the primary function of starting a poem, which is just to play and to have fun on the page. If we're worrying about the process much further down the line, whether the poem will be good or not, then that is getting in the way of that. But I mean, it's easy to do. And I do this as well. It's an avoidance tactic that I employ every time I think about writing a love poem, because it is a subject matter that is kind of laden with cliches, traps for us to fall into. And then the fourth one, I'm going to give you a fourth one. I believe in the power of three, but I'm adding one more as a kind of wild card. And that is poetry or a poem that we don't write because we feel that maybe it's too confusing. It might be that the subject matter or the experience isn't fully formed in our own minds. So putting it down on the page feels particularly challenging. Or it might be that we have the idea, but we don't know how to convey it in a way that just won't be, a tangle of ideas and confusion for the reader. So those are four headings that you should now have a few notes to yourself under the headings. And we're going to switch gears, because when we talk about poetry that doesn't exist or is unwritten, we're talking about absence. And the role of absence in a poem can be very effective. And so there might be a few techniques we could apply to these unwritten poems when we get to them, such as the use of or the avoidance of end-line punctuation. W.S. Merwin is a poet who employed this device in a lot of his poetry and created, through the absence of punctuation at the ends of lines, a kind of greater velocity, a kind of clearer sense of a poem on the page. And it's a very seductive idea that the end of a line is an implied pause or comma, and the end of a stanza is an implied period. So you don't need to add those points of punctuation to the poem. You can use punctuation internally within the middle of a line, but not at the ends of lines. And another poet who springs to mind is Ray Armantrout, whose poems feel very sparse, almost sort of haiku-like in their sort of, not their brevity, but their containment. And go and check out poems by either of those poets, and you'll you'll get a flavor of what I'm talking about. Sometimes absence in a poem can kind of be the use of ellipsis or ellipsis-like thinking. Ellipsis-like thinking applied to a poem. So you don't actually need to have the dot, dot, dot in the middle of a poem. You can just take out the dots but leave the space. And I suppose a sort of inverted version of that is the sort of redacted poem. And this is a great exercise you can play. Just go and print off a poem that you know, are familiar with, and then create a new poem by blanking out some of the words in that poem with a pen. So what you're left with is a poem that's made up of elements of the original, but the redacted poem is different, and the redacted poem kind of creates a dialogue between it and the original that inspired the redaction. And there are other ways, of course, in which to use omission and silence and restraint within a poem, techniques that you can employ. But those are just three for you to consider: the use of white space, the blank space between words that say something, the use of ellipsis, trying to go through a poem and look at what you can take out while retaining the poem's meaning. These are all really good kind of techniques that you can employ. Let's return, though, to the idea of writing an unwritten poem, and we're going to jump to prompts. The first poetry prompt I'm going to ask you to write is the outline to a refused poem. So go back to your list of poems that you made a few notes about under those headings: taboo poem, painful poem, cliched poem, confusing poem. Take one of those ideas and I want you to write an outline to that refused poem. You can use bullet points and just include the things that you would like to say, or the devices that you would employ, maybe the structure of the poem. You're speaking to those things, and in a way, through that outline, you create a kind of poem of the refused poem. The second prompt, again, draws on that list that we have under those headings. You're going to choose one of those subject areas to write and to draft a poem. It is called the Erased Memory poem. And this poem is about a memory that is difficult to write about. However, you are going to erase one key detail. It could be an action, it could be a name, but that action or name will not appear, as significant as it is, in the poem that you're going to draft. Write around the absence and see what you're left with. See how the writing actually will direct the reader to lean into that absence. It's a really, really kind of powerful tool to employ in the draft of this poem. And the third prompt is called the missing stanza. You're going to write a poem based on one of those ideas from the headings we had, and you're going to write 3 stanzas. However, you are going to omit entirely the second stanza. You might want to put a note in square brackets in the space where the second stanza would be, saying that this stanza has been deliberately omitted by the artist. So what you actually have are bookends to that missing stanza. And again, you're going to choose one of the subject areas that we've discussed, and you can actually start perhaps by writing the 3 movements of the poem, and then when you've written the whole poem, simply omit the second stanza, or you can imagine the second stanza, what that might contain. And that's exactly what the reader will be doing when they discover this poem. It's a very interesting device, not often employed, but it will give you a really, I think, a good workout in terms of thinking about what is unwritten and the presence that absence creates. So there you are, a brief exploration of poems that we don't write, and I'm going to go and do the same exercise right now. If you're feeling brave enough, why don't you share in the comments below the video some of the ideas that you've been playing with as a response to this video. As always, thank you very much for watching. It really is appreciated, and if you like the video, please do give it a thumbs up and subscribe if you haven't already. And of course, I will be back very soon with more poetry content. Thank you very much for watching.